It's a good thing for her, and we actually, I've tried gluten-free food. I'll prefer extra gluten if there's any way to do that. But so we were going into the grocery store to get gluten-free, and then recently we've also gone gluten-free, dairy-free, GF, DF. It's all stupid to me, but not really. So we're going into the store. This reveals how dumb I am. So we're going in the store, and Sally goes, well, we need to get the gluten-free, dairy-free. Has anybody figured out where dairy-free cheese is kept? I mean, oh, Hannah texted you, good, because I looked everywhere. I mean, Cheese Whiz, that's dairy-free cheese. Does that work? No. I'm getting completely off track. So we're going in, and for those of you who have not had the privilege of buying anything gluten-free, it's like 10 times the cost of everything else. It's 6 pieces of bread. It shouldn't cost $7 because you took the gluten out. It's like, woohoo, you probably didn't have gluten to begin with. But so anyways, gluten-free, dairy-free. I said, well, Sally, it's more expensive. There's a part of me that would feel really good if we could mix up a batch of it. It's just Julia eating the gluten-free stuff. Let's mix up a batch of it and then leave it from Saturday to Saturday, and that way we can pour it out. Because it has to keep, because there's nothing in there, they'll spoil, there's no gluten, there's no dairy, it can't spoil, right? So we could just pretty much leave it on, it can gel. And Sally goes, but Mike, Here's the good part. Here's where I reveal how smart I am. But Mike, it has eggs in it. To which I said, well, that's dairy, isn't it? For those of you who don't know, just because it's in the dairy section at the Kroger does not mean that it's actually a dairy item. I'm thinking eggs come from a farm. It's a dairy farm. They happen to have eggs. I love to make my wife laugh. I set that whole thing up just so she would have a good laugh. What in the world has that got to do anything? Look, if it's got gluten in it, it's got gluten in it. If it's got dairy in it, it's got dairy in it. If there is holiness in the root, if there is holiness in the dough, it doesn't matter how many times you spread that dough out, how many times you separate that dough, how many branches you put off of that root. If the root is good, everything from there on is going to be good. And guess what our root is? Jesus Christ. Our root is holy. Our root is holy. What you are attached to is holy. Well, but I'm so unholy, I might run back down the taproot and I might spoil everything for everybody. Don't think that much of yourself, okay? Your unholiness doesn't begin to affect Jesus' holiness. Remember, Jesus never walked up to a leper and got leprosy. Jesus always gave away his wholeness, because his holiness was so much more powerful than anything else. All that from just the first verse. Here we go. Verse 17 and 18. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, now he's talking specifically to the Gentiles, you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and became partaker of them of the rich root of the olive tree. So it's an olive tree. It's a rich root. There's holiness in the root. The branch that was there was broken off so that you could be put in. Do not be arrogant toward the branches, but if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. Look what I've done. Look what I've accomplished. Here I am. It's all about me. I'm glad I was able to bless you with my presence, Lord. It's not that at all. It's like he's saying, look, don't be arrogant about the fact that the branch was broken off of the olive so that the wild olive could be put in. That's you, and now you're connected to the good root. Why do you have any reason to use that as a battering ram against those who are not yet in the kingdom of heaven, those who have been raised in the Jewish tradition? Verses 19 through 21. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right, they were broken off for their unbelief, but you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. So the idea was there's neither has greater value. That there's not a lesser and a greater thing. There is God. Now, the branches were broken off because of their unbelief. But God did what? He took their unbelief and he took that fact that they would pull away. He used that because he uses all things for good. And he used that breaking away to insert us, the Gentiles. But he always knew that he would put them back. He always knew that there would be a returning. You look through the Old Testament, how many times did Israel go away and come back, and go away and come back? It was their pattern. And God was not going to leave them out. So God is faithful. He will spare the natural branch, and he will spare the unnatural branch, which is the Gentile. Verse 22, behold then the kindness and severity of God. To those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness. If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you will also be cut off. We're to continue in God's kindness, and many of these Gentile converts were becoming unkind to the Jewish people. Not only does God set your value, but God sets the value of everybody else. You know, that's one of the things we hear a lot. One of the things that Bill Johnson has said, you know, the only person who gets to set your value is the one who created you. You don't get to set your value. Your parents don't get to set your value. Your society doesn't get to set your value. There's only one person who gets to set your value, and that is the one who created you. And what does God say? He says, you are a prize of great price. You are a pearl of great price. You're the apple of my eye. Your name is written on the palm of my hand. That's what God thinks of us. He sets our value. Well, good. Now I get to go out and set everybody else's value. Wrong. God's already set their value. My job is to agree with God in setting their value. How much difference would it be when you have that person you're struggling with, that person who you were just going toe-to-toe with, and you would really just like to just accidentally run them over? I said it. But you begin to go, but how does God value this person? Oh, wait, God, you value them as much as you value me? I think you may need to recalculate, God, because this person, there's no way that you, or some of you are the other side. It's like, but that person is much more valuable to God than I am. That person is they got so many more talents, so many more gifts, so much this, so much that. God sets our value, and he values all of us the same. So when I look at other people, I don't need to give them more value or less value, but the same value that God gives them, and that's how I'm supposed to deal with them. Romans 11:23-24. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are the natural branches be grafted into the one olive tree? So after transplant surgery, what happens? Well, you have to take drugs so that you will not reject that new organ that's been placed in you. But if it comes from a relative, especially a parent or a brother or sister, they're not near so concerned about the rejection. You still have to take it a little bit, and you still have to be careful. But if they took your liver out and then put your liver back in, guess how much they're worried about rejection? They're not, because it came out of you and it goes back into you. And that's basically what he's saying is, look, Gentiles, it's awesome. He grafted you in. And he's going to graft them back in. And if he can take you who are wild and unnatural and graft you in and at work, you don't think he can take them who are natural and graft them right back in and they're going to be fine? Paul is just really excited here about, look, God is just he is so good at grafting in. Let's trust him with this. Then verse 25-27. I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentile has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, The deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Now, this phrase hardening, it's kind of like when you begin to get arthritis or something like that. It's like there's something built up on there that stops the natural movement of that joint. Or you begin to get something that covers your eyes, where you begin to your eyesight is dimmed from something that's on the outside, that's a hardening. And the Israelites their hearts had been hardening pretty much from day one, and then they would go through a period of softening, and then it would be hardening and softening and hardening and softening. And he's saying, okay, so there's been a hardening, but that's going to be reversed, and all of Israel is going to have the potential to be saved. Now, when we look at this and we say, well, okay, well, it says there that so all Israel will be saved. This quote is coming from Isaiah 59. It doesn't mean that every single Israelite, but it means there's going to be a major harvest of the Israelite nation. So it's not about potential of all, but the reality that there's going to be that it's going to be open to all of them. Okay, there's not going to be we're going to take the first 5 people, we're going to take the first 10 people, or whatever. But it doesn't mean in any way. It doesn't mean that everybody gets in. Okay, there is this thing called universalism, and universalism is the belief that at the end it doesn't matter what you do, what you say, what you receive, what you don't receive. God has redeemed everybody, and so we're all in. Now, let me just go ahead and say, if that's what God wants to do, He's God, and He can do that. But I don't believe that He teaches that through the Scripture, that's how it's going to work. But if I get there, if I get to heaven and I look around and there's some people who I'm like, oh, okay, good, awesome, man. If I made it, you can make it. It's pretty good. Verse 28 and 29. From the standpoint of the gospel, there are enemies for your sake. But from the standpoint of God's choice, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. Paul is speaking from personal experience. I used to be an enemy of the Christian church. I was going around, I was putting people in prison, I was overseeing their deaths, I was making life miserable for them. It seems like they are enemies, but they are actually part of the plan of God, where He has taken that and He has opened up the opportunity for the Gentiles to become part of this beautiful grafted olive tree. I was thinking about this, and I'm going to share this, and hopefully it makes sense to you like it did me. What God is doing to me, in my mind, how I see this, is God is moving pieces on a chessboard to bring about His will. So God took those that were in out to bring those that were out in, and now He will bring those who were in then out back in. He's moving pieces because what? Ultimately, He wants to bring it all together. And He is so good at doing this. And, I think about the movies that we've seen where you got that great athlete, he's the star, he's the number 1 draft pick, he's awesome, but he's got a little bit of an attitude, and, he just kind of halfway shows up. And one day, coach says, you, sit down, and he sits down, and he says, you, come on, and that's like, that kid is not nearly as talented, he's not as big, he's not as fast, he's not as popular, blah, 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 but he goes out there and he plays his heart out. And now the athlete, the number 1 guy eventually goes, wait a minute, I may be looking at this wrong. Maybe I should get out there and try. And so eventually what happens is the guy who used to be first and then got put back, now when he comes out, man, he is on fire. And this is all part of God's plan and how He's doing this. So where He is going to eventually bring back and open that back up, and how incredible that's going to be. Verse 30 through 32. For just as you once were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience. Gentiles were disobedient, but we've been shown mercy because of the Jews' disobedience.